All right, welcome back to ABA Exam Review and the continuation of our RBT Practice Exam Series, where we're going through another set of questions together and breaking them down. If you're new to the channel, welcome. If you're returning, welcome back. Please subscribe. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials, including our combo pack. When you pass your exam, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shoutout. Work hard, study hard. Let's get going. A student consistently avoids completing math assignments by tearing up their worksheet. When the student tears up a worksheet, the teacher immediately removes the math worksheet and gives them a reading assignment instead. This causes the student to tear up worksheets even more frequently. In this scenario, being given a reading assignment appears to be functioning as a what? Okay, so let's focus on what the question is asking because it's very precise. We're looking at a situation where the question wants to know about the student being given a reading assignment. So we're looking at the student who's avoiding completing math assignments by tearing up their worksheet. Now, with consequence questions, we're looking for how the behavior changes with the consequence. We know after the consequence, the student is tearing up worksheets even more. So has that behavior increased or decreased? That behavior has increased. If the behavior increases, the consequence must be reinforcing in some capacity. Now, if the student tears up the worksheet is removed, and then the reading assignment is provided. So we're not looking at the removal of the worksheet. We're looking at the reading assignment being given, as the question is stating. If we were looking at the removal of the math worksheet, we'd be thinking along the lines of a negative consequence because it's a removal. But we're looking at the addition of the reading assignment, making it a positive consequence. So since the behavior is increasing and we're looking at a positive consequence, it's going to be positive reinforcement. We covered B, negative reinforcement. If we were looking at the removal, that would have been negative, but we're adding something, so it's positive. C and D are both punishers, and since that behavior increased, it can't be punishment because punishment only decreases. A behavior technician is observing a child's tantrum behavior. The child starts to cry, then screams, and drops to the floor and kicks. The technician records the precise order of these actions. Which type of measurement is the technician primarily focused on here? So we're thinking about measuring this behavior, but in not a continuous or discontinuous way. And what I mean by that is with continuous measurement, we're looking at a count or a length of time. In this case, the technician is looking at the order of these actions. So they're looking at the crying, the screaming, the floor and kicks. What order do these specific actions take place? And in order to know that, you've got to identify what these actions look like. So if we're focused on what these actions look like, what are we focused on? Well, A, topography. Topography is what the behavior looks like. So if the technician is focused on the crying and then the screaming and then the floor dropping to the floor and kicking and then ordering those actions in a precise order, they're worried about the topography and the order that topography happens. Now, what is B, magnitude? Magnitude is the intensity. In other words, if we were to think how loud or quietly the screaming is, that's magnitude, the intensity of the behavior. We're not necessarily worried about the intensity of the crying or the screaming or the kicking. We're worried about how it looks and in what order. And then latency and inter-response time are both continuous measurements. They both measure time in between. The technician isn't necessarily measuring any sort of time, but rather the order that these specific topographies occur in. So the technician is primarily focused on topography. An office manager notices that employees are often late returning from their lunch break. To reduce this, they install a digital time clock that employees must punch when they leave for and return from break, and the policy states that late returns will result in deductions from their accumulated flex time. The digital time clock primarily functions as a component of what? So don't overthink this question. It's wordy. It can be a little confusing, but we're just looking at the digital time clock. What is a digital time clock there for? We have an office manager who sees their employees are late. And so they install a digital clock that employees punch when they leave for and return from break. So what is that time clock doing? Well, it's tracking when these employees are coming and going, all right? They put it in the contingency, late returns result in deductions, and they're tracking that using a digital time clock. So that digital time clock is a means of some sort of measurement. Now, if you look at A and B, stimulus and response generalization, we're not really focused on generalization, and neither is the office manager. They just want these employees to start returning on time to this specific workplace. C, self-management. Self-management is an ABA concept, but it's not necessarily one you need to know as an RBT. And this is not self-management, since the office manager is the one placing the contingency and placing this data collection system. So what this digital time clock is really doing is helping the manager collect data. And you might think, well, why is that important? Well, the tools you use to collect data are extremely important. It's going to help you be reliable, it's going to help you be accurate, and it's going to help you be consistent. And so this office manager is using this digital time clock, which is functioning as a form or a component of data collection. In a day camp, a counselor notices a child repeatedly tries to pick gum from under tables. Each time the child reaches under the table, the counselor gently places their own hand in the way to stop the behavior. What is this intervention called? Easy question. When you get an easy question, if you're prepared, then we don't want to overthink it. Trust your preparation and answer it. What is this intervention called? A counselor sees a child trying to pick gum from under tables. When the child reaches it under the table, the counselor places their own hand physically to stop the behavior. What do we call it when we use physical touch to prevent a behavior from occurring? We call that response blocking. The counselor is blocking the response. It's as straightforward as that. Now let's look at C, extinction. Response blocking is not necessarily extinction. For extinction to occur, the response has to occur. If we're blocking the response, then that response can't occur for us to withhold reinforcement. So don't confuse response blocking and extinction. It's two separate things. Response cost is the removal of a earned reinforcer, which is not occurring here. The response is just being prevented. And then D, negative reinforcement. Well, that's a consequence, and we're not really sure how the behavior is changing. And then response blocking is technically an attempt at punishment. So the counselor placing their own hand in a way to stop the behavior is response blocking. Security guard is trained to identify and report suspicious packages. After extensive training with various examples of suspicious packages, the guard is able to correctly identify a suspicious package they have never seen before in a real-world scenario. This demonstrates what? Immediately, you should, while reading this, pick up on the guard can correctly identify never seen real-world scenario. Immediately, you should be thinking generalization, right? Because they were taught to identify and report these packages. And using all these examples, they can now go into the real world and use that same skill of identifying packages, even on packages they haven't seen. So what do we call it when we have one response or we engage in the same response across multiple stimuli? Well, we call that stimulus generalization. With stimulus generalization, multiple stimuli all evoke the same response. So these packages are all evoking the same response of identifying or identification from this guard. Now, what is response generalization? Response generalization is when multiple responses are occurring in the presence of the same stimulus. This guard's response isn't changing. He's identifying the packages. What's changing is the stimulus. So you have to ask yourself, is the stimulus changing or is the response changing? It's not maintenance, because maintenance occurs on the trained examples, right? On the taught examples, and what is being taught, and after the intervention stops. This is much more of a generalization scenario. So what this most demonstrates is stimulus generalization. Thanks for watching. Check out btexamreview.com for all of our study materials. When you pass, let us know so we can include you in the Sunday shout-out. Work hard, study hard. See you soon.